Okay, hello everyone. Thanks for logging into this podcast. I have Rajat Badami here with me. A graduate of BIT, Rajat then also went on to become the president of I6 local chapter in Bangalore. And since then, he has been a serial entrepreneur as well as a kind of food and beverage consultant. So he is the director of Kingsmen Coffee. And along with that, he's also started up with both beertech.io and Buffbaer Private Limited. Rajat, anything else about your intro that you'd want to add before we get into the questions?
No, I think you pretty much covered it there, so I'm good.
Perfect. Okay, let's get into the questions. And I think first thing that a lot of people in our community and people want to understand is for a serial entrepreneur like you, right, and always finding new problems that you want to solve, and always building something and continuously trying to scale it, right? So you've had that hustle. I think even before college started, you had bad machines, right? And we'll cover more on that later. But
Sure.
For you and with this just do it attitude and sort of keep going at problems and finding new things to solve. In your journey, how do you pick? What has been your process for picking on the problem that you wanted to solve, and what was like a framework that you used for it? And second, let's also look at one important aspect that a lot of entrepreneurs attest to, which is luck, right? And being at the right place at the right time also. So, can you just, in your journey, talk about like the luck versus the plan aspect, right? And how much of it
Yeah.
was intentional, not intentional? But first, let's talk about how you picked on problems to solve and how you found the next thing you want to work on.
Sure. So I think problem identification as a process has multiple ways you can go about it, and it's a very sort of a subjective or individualistic process that you can follow because there's no one right solution to it,
Hmm.
right? So I can speak about what worked for me,
Yeah.
and from a very early age on, for me, it came very natural to sort of identify inefficiencies in systems,
Hmm.
right? I would just look at my surroundings and things around me, and like almost to borderline OCD level, where if there was something wrong about something, it would really affect me. And that's one of the things which has often led me to identifying what are the problems that exist in my reality, right? So a huge part of my problem identification process came from sort of gauging and understanding your reality
Hmm.
really well, and always keeping that open attitude or perspective to uh, absorb things as they are, and to sort of look for inefficiencies in that environment or surrounding,
Hmm.
right? So that is one of the things that has really helped me. The other thing which is very close to me, which I have spoken to on multiple occasions to multiple people, is the concept of linear programming, right?
Hmm.
Like something that we studied in, I think, 10th or 11th grade mathematics, where you're given a particular equation, which is your principal equation, and then there are constraints to that.
Hmm.
And then you're supposed to find the most optimal solution to
Hmm.
the main equation based on the constraints that you're given, right? So, and especially when you visualize this process, LPP is all about visualization. So you'll realize that there are multiple, plots or graphs which cut each other, and there is this area which is formed under them.
Hmm.
And the end points of the areas are your most optimal points if
Yeah.
you want to find the minima or the maxima, right? So LPP as a concept is something which has really stuck with me for the longest time since I came across it or stumbled on it, and it's something that I've sort of applied to real life situations where it could be as simple as friends hanging out and deciding where to go for dinner, right? People might just say, okay, I like this kind of food, and let's go here. But for me, my brain naturally goes in a thought process where I'm trying to put in all the variables. Okay, what's the commute time? What might be the congestion or traffic on the way? How many people are span of how many vehicles or whatever it is, right? So you see the various factors, and then eventually try to come up with a solution from something as basic as deciding where to go out for dinner to something like, I don't know, what name do you want to give your brand, or how do you want to run your business. So across spectrums of life, LPP has been something which has really helped me identify problems.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think both of these combined together are how I have mostly stumbled upon the problems which I wanted to solve.
Hmm.
So that's that. And coming to the second aspect of your question, which is really luck versus plan, right? So it's a very tricky question because um, First things first, what I truly believe in is on focusing on your controllables. And what is in your control is your scope of execution, which is
Mm,
your planning, your strategy, your idea, and what you're going to invest into that. Right. So, in order for you to excel or thrive with a plan, with a situation, within an environment, it's very important for you to have a deep understanding of what you are signing up for, or what you're owning up to, or what your responsibilities are, or what your scope is. And in order for you to obtain that understanding, you need to have on one end knowledge, and on
mm,
the other end, you need to have clarity.
mm,
Right. So knowledge can be attained through upskilling, formal and informal ways,
mm,
whereas clarity can be, or not the only way, but one of the most effective ways to attain clarity is through meticulous planning.
mm,
Right. So that's where planning really plays a key role in terms of you understanding, be it whatever it is, be it your job, be it your college, be it your entrepreneurial journey, be it your podcast, whatever it is. If you have a well structured planning process, you
mm,
will more often than not encounter situations that will come your way, which you have planned for and haven't as well, just
mm,
because you have a vague direction or a vision that you're working towards.
mm,
Right. So that is where planning plays a very key role in terms of you understanding how to navigate yourselves through the uncertainty of life.
mm,
But having said that, luck is something that will at some point invariably influence and come into or become a part of this journey. Right. So it's something that you always need to keep an eye out for. It's something that you cannot live without or cannot move away from. And it's something which is not in your control. It's something which may or may not, as I was saying, luck is something which is not in your control. It's often uncontrollable, and it may or may not directly influence your situation. It can have direct and indirect impact. And it might be sometimes in your favor, it's sometimes not in your favor.
mm,
Right. So I think what's important when it comes to luck is that if it is in your favor, you need to be humble and grounded enough to accept that and sort of make the most out of it.
mm,
And if it is not, you need to be agile enough to sort of adapt to your new reality and
mm,
still sort of evolve through the situation that you're put in, and try to achieve your end goal, or your vision that you set out for,
mm,
despite the situation not really panning out in the way you planned for it or expected it to be.
mm,
So, luck is something that you cannot plan for. Luck is something that you cannot time it, or you cannot, control it. It's something that comes your way, sometimes good, sometimes bad, but never stop because of that. Even
mm,
if it is in your favor, as I mentioned, be humble about it, make the most out of it, and grow from it. And if it is not, learn from it, and then sort of build from there on. So uh, I would again highly recommend focusing on planning, because that is in your control. That is something that you can do um, in your totality. That is something that you can definitely sort of work towards in terms of as I mentioned, having a vision, or for that matter, you going into a particular direction.
mm. Got it. Yeah. So, just to stay on the same topic, when you're talking about a plan, right? What amount of detail are you talking about when you mean when you recommend having a plan? Is this just a for example, let's say a person who's in their early 20s, for example, would you say have a plan in terms of in the next 10 years of my life, these are like sort of like the rough things that I want to work towards, and then sort of hold everything that comes your way after that, you sort of know where to place it against your list of priorities? Or would you say that it's more like a detailed short-term plan that says that, okay, in 6 months, I need to be this, 1 year, I need to be this, something like that? So is it like a fully personal, person-dependent thing? Or are there like general thinking frameworks that you can adopt when making a plan?
I mean, for starters, I think uh, there are multiple frameworks and mental models out there that you can go and research and adapt and sort of evolve your planning from there. There are multiple templates, processes that are available online that you can use in your planning journey or exercise. Introspection is a huge aspect of it, where you spend some time with yourself and try to really understand or process everything that has happened with you and where you want to be, and sort of visualize that, right? The power of visualization, and from there on bridge the gap between your current state and your ideal state. That's probably how you can go about it. But having said that, if I had to sort of highlight one simple exercise or one simple model that could help you with planning, is something that I did where have been doing since a very early on. Is just take a piece of paper, make three columns on it, write down your skills in the first one, write down your passions in the second one, and write down opportunities or market on the third one, and just start listing everything that comes to your mind. Right. So, and once the list is big enough, you just try to connect three of them,
Mm.
right? So when passion meets skill meets opportunity is when the magic happens.
Mm. Yeah.
So that's again, as I mentioned, one simple model or exercise or tool that you could use to go about your planning, and there are plenty of resources out there.
Yeah, yeah. Brilliant, brilliant. I think that's a great insight. It's a good uh, thing for people to think about when they're listening to this as well. Okay, let's now first start off with, I think we'll go into your journey more and like sort of like the insights that you got from each venture or each stage of your life, right? If I may. So, and the first thing is with M.A.D Machines and on social media, earning a huge number of followers from automotive enthusiasts and everything around that, right? So for a lot of people who have passions about things like automobiles, about sports, etc., and they want and they're looking at content creation, especially we know we now live in an age where content creation has become so much more evolved than it was like, let's say, 5 years ago or like a decade ago,
Sure.
right? So now it's like such a big, it's like a viable option to do on the side also, if not full time. So for some tips from your journey, from what you've seen, if you'd like to share for people in the content creation journey, what would you say? And let's again, two aspects we'll look at it. One is offering something unique in whatever field of your interest is, and how do you sort of go about that? How do you sort of think about that? And another one is organically gaining followers. So what is that process like from what you've seen, and what should people expect when it comes to that? So yeah.
All right. So I think when it comes to offering something unique, right? Like it all starts from content.
Hmm.
It all that's where it starts, right? So for me, at least, when we started Bad Machines, it was back in 2010,
Hmm.
and it was not even started with the intent to become what it eventually did, right? It To begin with, how it started was I was somebody who was very passionate about automobiles and supercars in particular. I used
Hmm.
to follow the industry a lot, read up a lot about the specifications and the latest technology developments, and what different manufacturers or companies are up to, and what's up for release in the coming months and years, and what hybrid models are coming out, and so on and so forth, right? So I was very passionate about the industry as a whole, and I always wanted to be very closely involved with it. And that is when I realized that, okay, on weekends we used to go to hotspots where the supercar owners of our city, Bangalore, used to come for a meetup, right? So they would all on a Sunday afternoon come for a coffee and catch up, and we would be in the same hotspots, and we would stumble upon Lamborghinis and Ferraris and Maseratis, on Bangalore streets, and that was amazing to look at, see, and even just sort of them racing past you gives
Yeah.
you that adrenaline with respect to the whole, the sound of it, the power of it, and all of that. And this is what automobile maniacs are driven by, or at least I was, right? So for me, it was very sort of pure in that sense, and it came from there. It was never sort of an idea I wanted to work on or something of that sort. So we used to do that religiously every Sunday for almost 6 months. And what we used to do is, when these supercars are parked, we used to just go with a camera and start taking pictures of the cars from all angles, right? And then suddenly, after doing this for a fair few weekends, I realized that I have so much content on me that I didn't know what to do off it.
Hmm.
And that is when I said, okay, let's just start a Facebook page and
Hmm.
start posting there and see what happens, right? So I just started a page, and we started posting about the sightings we had in the city.
Hmm.
And that suddenly picked on like wildfire. And I realized that there are a lot of people who are interested to see this, right? So, and frankly speaking, getting pictures of a supercar is no big deal. You can Google
Yeah.
right now and you will get plenty of images, right? So, what was really unique there was the fact that it was localized. So the
Hmm.
backgrounds, the streets, the whole picture or the content was unique, where people could relate to it.
Yeah.
Like, for example, seeing a picture of a Lamborghini versus seeing a picture of a Lamborghini parked at UB City,
Yeah.
right? Which one do you think is going to attract you more, or which one do you think you're going to relate more to,
Yeah.
right? So things like that. These were the things that actually worked in our favor. So first things first, offering something unique. It all starts from content. right? So you need to get your content strategy right. You need to figure out what's in demand or how to be relevant with your content. And once you have that, from there on, it's more about you doing the basics right in the initial stages, right? Like you need to understand um, what kind of content is driving engagement and how do you sort of build on that. What other things can you do in order for you to increase your visibility, and so on and so forth. So first and foremost, what I would recommend is to focus on your content and how to make it relevant and unique through whatever ways you can. Because at the end of the day, that's what people want to see. They don't want to see something which is recycled off the internet and published on your page. They want you to bring your uniqueness
Yeah.
onto them, right? And if they relate or connect to that, that's when they really start following your brand, your channel, or whatever that is. So I think you need to start from understanding what's relevant in the time and build your entire content strategy around that, right? So that was the first thing. What is your second question again?
uh, Followership, gaining organic traction, and sort of like some insights that you've seen on that.
Yeah, so about that, so you see, we started this page almost a decade ago, before socials or Facebook or Instagram was what it is today, right? Like, and just to sort of draw a parallel, I just want to, for a few seconds, talk about a product life cycle, right? So there are four stages in a product life cycle. There is your problem identification, solution, problem solution fit, and initial development, which becomes your phase one. Then you have your initial rollouts and traction and understanding feedback from the market, implementing that and going through that iterative process, which is your second phase of basically your growth phase. Then comes your sort of maturity or monetization phase. And the fourth stage of product life cycle is usually decline or product evolution, right? And then it's a cycle that goes through. So when we started out close to a decade ago, I think I can safely say most of these socials and platforms were either in their second stage, which is growth, or even their first stage, some of them, which is their initial development and introduction, where they were still doing user acquisitions and focusing more on those things, right? But since 2015, 16, all of these platforms have grown so much that they've all sort of matured into the third and the fourth phase, which is monetization, or for that matter, product evolution.
Yeah.
Right. So that is when, like, we could see a very, very drastic change. Like, for example, pre 2015, it was so much more relatively easier to gain organic followers or have organic outreach, as opposed to now, where it's all inorganic. If you really want to, leverage the true potential of socials or Google or any of these platforms for that
Yeah.
matter, it is completely inorganic because it's driven by the sort of a product life cycle mindset, right? They're in their third or fourth phase, so they definitely want to monetize as much as possible. So yeah, it's definitely not as easy as it used to be. It's definitely gotten more challenging, and also, as you mentioned, more and more people have entered the space,
Yeah.
right? So it's gotten more competitive as well. So, if I have to just sort of give you a few things on what worked for us and what could potentially still be relevant and work for people today in terms of having an organic outreach or gain organic followers, is first things first, as I mentioned, focus on your basics, organize your account, make sure your, descriptions, DPs, tags, all of these are in place. These are the most fundamentals and basics. If these are not well organized and sort of don't have a clear call to action, then there is no point of you doing anything else because the chain breaks right there, right? So that's the first thing. After that, I think one of the most important things is to be regular with your content. Sort of have a very strict content calendar where there is predictability in frequency of content, because uh, the first stage is acquiring users. Assuming you do make it through the first stage, which is a challenging process in itself, what is going to help you retain people is that predictability or in frequency of content.
Yeah.
All right. So once you have acquired a fair share of audience, what you need to focus more is on consistency. Uh, After that, I think you can, one of the other things that you can definitely do to improve your organic is to have constant feedback loops on your content, understand what is driving engagement and how you can do more of that, and understand what is not driving engagement and cut that from your content pipeline. because not everything that you try is going to work. Not everything that you put in place as a strategy is going to work. So it's always important for you to have that sort of feedback loop, and for you to understand what is driving engagement and how can you do more of that, right? So that's probably one thing. Another factor that drives organic is how are you providing value through your content or through whatever you're doing, right? Like that's, I think, one of the most important things. Like in today's age and day, information is accessible to most, right? So the most important thing is you need to provide value,
Yeah.
right? So how are you providing that value? Is it by you doing the research, you putting in all the efforts and saving people's time to give them bite-sized information which they can easily digest, which is one sort of value you can give. Is it through, let's say, your delivery? Is it through the fact that you make it funny, or you keep it engaging, and that becomes your USP, or that becomes your differentiation, and that is what drives organic followers. So it could be value, could be in terms of delivery as well. So identify what you're good at or what your capabilities are and how you can derive value through what you're doing, right? So I think that's one of the key factors which will definitely boost organic outreach. um, and Lastly, like I mentioned, in the last few years, because the organic reach has died down across platforms, one of the things that you should definitely plan for is having that alternative channel, or how you're going to funnel your initial outreach, right? Like when you start from zero likes or zero followers, for you to get the ball rolling, it might be very challenging, right? And more often than not, people get to probably a few hundred or a few thousands, and then they give up, saying they're not able to grow beyond this, right? So that's primarily because they bank on just one single channel, and they focus on just maybe their content or just the one thing that they know or they are doing, and hope that the rest will fall into place, right? But more often than not, that is not the case. So it's very important for you, especially in current day and age, for you to sort of if not have it wholly built out, at least have a sort of a direction or a vision of a funnel that you're working towards, right? And you can definitely reach out or explore various other channels. Like, for example, you can look at offline, right? You can look at events, you can look at networking forums, you can look at a bunch of other places offline, which could give you that initial inertia required to get the ball rolling on your socials, right? So that's one way you can go about it. Another way would be probably for you to look at some sort of channel partners, or some sort of an entry into a community where you already have your target audience ready, right? So it could be joining an emailing list. It could be, again, there are multiple ways you can go about it. So what's the most important thing is to not really bank on one channel and say, okay, I'm just going to focus on content and let Instagram do my job for me. That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Right. So you need to sort of work towards that funnel.
Brilliant, brilliant. Yeah. I think extremely exhaustive guide towards, I think, content creation and growing your followership that you offered. So very glad that you covered like all those different aspects as well. So that's great. We'll move slightly ahead, and we'll talk about Kingsmen Coffee right now. And I think the first thing that we want to understand, or people want to understand, is that opening a food and beverage brand is something that actually is like a dream for many people. It's very lucrative for a lot of people because they're very passionate about it. They want to do something about it, but there are challenges that gets in the way, right? And I think especially for something like coffee, sourcing is one such thing. But then beyond that as well, for anything else in F&B, logistics becomes a problem, and then branding and sort of standing out of the crowd, that becomes a problem. So all these challenges that sort of go around it, right? So when you're talking about any F&B brand and starting it up, what do you have to say in terms of, or what insights should you have to offer in terms of the right sourcing, and how important does that become? And another part is we'll look at logistics and branding and like those aspects of it as well, and some insights on that. So yeah, both of these things.
Sure. I mean, the first thought that comes to my mind when you ask me about sourcing is that we have this very famous saying in the coffee industry: "Your cup is only as good as what you put into it." Right? So, I mean, that sums it up. So, if you're talking about F&B, your sourcing is everything. Your raw materials are everything. So, you get what you procure or what you manage to source, right? Like the quality or the final output of what you're serving. So, if I have to talk about coffee in particular, When it comes to coffee, we have something known as a crop system. There are three main attributes to a crop system. The first one is elevation, the second one is rainfall, and the third one is the plant species of coffee, right? So there are, for example, most people know just two main broad species, which is Arabica and Robusta.
Yeah.
But once you sort of dive deep into coffee, you'll realize that each one of these have further species defined within them. And if you pull out, you can actually, listeners can go and Google a coffee family tree, and they'll realize that there are close to about 80 plus species of coffee that grow globally, right? So there are different species of coffee. So you see the three factors I mentioned, all three of them combined together influence the kind of output or quality of coffee that you get from a particular region or a farm. So when we go sourcing, it's very important for us to start measuring coffee from this aspect, right? This is where we start. We first understand the crop system. Once we know the crop system, we know what sort of an output to expect, what sort of a roast profile could go well on this, what sort of a curing method you can do in order for you to get maximum out of this bean. Which channels or which sort of a user base or consumer might this appeal to? How can you add the more uniqueness to this product? How can you bring out the best out of this product? So on and so forth, right? So sourcing is the most important step in F&B and in coffee, because it dictates what or how your end product comes out to be, right? So I can't stress enough on the significance or the importance of sourcing. Um, Having said that, the next part of your question was around logistics, right? Logistics. Yes, I mean, logistics contributes directly in multiple ways, but two most important ways is number one, it contributes to your EBITDA or your costs, right? And secondly, it contributes to your brand outlook as well. So if you've noticed, one of the key trends in the F&B right now is about how you can make your brand or organization sustainable, how you can be more eco-friendly, how can you reduce your carbon footprint, and all of that, right? So, excuse me, consumers are getting more and more aware about all these factors, and their decisions are actually driven by factors like which brand is more eco-friendly and how their logistics or overall carbon footprint is derived, right? So, I can actually give you a very real-time example. Speaking of logistics, we earlier had a regular vehicle, commercial vehicle, which used to take our goods around in the city. And recently, we actually moved to an EV to do the same job for us. And our vehicle on an average day probably travels about 100 kilometers. So that's 3,000 in a month, which is about 36,000 a year. Right now, if I have to just sort of do a cost comparison, regular, petrol or a diesel vehicle would, for 36,000 kilometers per year, roughly cost us about maybe around about 7.2 lakhs or so, somewhere about there as a logistical expense. Now, since we have moved to the EV, we have seen that cost almost drop to close to 3 to 3.25 lakhs. That's almost cut in half, right? So on one end, we have a cost advantage. Uh, of course, this cost advantage comes at some amount of capex upfront, right? So there is cash flow as well, which is another important aspect of this. But assuming you have that sorted, uh, you're directly reducing costs, which is a direct win for the organization, right? And if that's not enough, as I mentioned, it directly contributes to your brand or your marketing pipeline as well. Where now we can finally claim to our consumers that all our logistics is done through an EV vehicle, which is eco-friendly, where our carbon emissions have gone down drastically. We have moved from plastic cups to paper cups, right? That's another thing which we can claim to our consumers, saying by being a customer of our brand, you are contributing in these ways, right? So there are these small ways and big ways in which you can use. And as a business owner or as somebody who's involved in the business, who has some sort of say or capacity in the decision making process, I think it's very important for you to really have that holistic approach on the scope of the decision that you're taking, right? Like for us, it might seem like a very simple decision of, yeah, let's just hire a regular vehicle or a porter or one of these and get the job done. But then when you take a step back and look at it holistically, you'll realize that these are not things that you just say, right? Like these are actually things that matter, right? You are killing the planet as we speak. We all are. And at some point, we need to bring in that change. At some point, we need to start working towards that positive change in ways we all can, no matter how small or how big, right? So one needs to have that holistic approach when it comes to decision making and sort of really see the long term impact the decisions they're taking are having. And based on that, based on the financial aspect of that, based on the branding aspect of that, you could sort of then weigh all of these in and finally probably take your decision.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, it's very interesting insight. Sort of staying on the same topic and moving to slightly different, or moving to the other side rather, right? Because in these cases or in a lot of cases when you're working with F&B, you don't have a lot of control over like the manufacturing aspect of it, and not a lot of control into like growing the yield and all of that, because it's not you who's like actually doing it, right? So in such cases, there is still some intervention that you can do to sort of really grow, but that's on the other side, which is with your customers and sort of understanding that data and understanding that better. So in this sense, to become a better brand, right, day by day, what can you do in terms of, again, look at two aspects over here on like the customer side, which is one, doing the right market research, and how important does that become to sort of stand out and really make a name for yourself. And the second is feedback analysis, which is once obviously you're starting to get some response from the crowd, how do you then deal with that? Because I think with software and all that, it's sort of very linear, right? What is possible,
Yeah.
and it's all dependent on how much feasibility there is for new features that you can bring in. But it's not always the case over here, because you can't bring in like a new ingredient, or you can't source ingredient, something like that. So how important is feedback analysis in this case? So again, to sum up, I think right market research first thing, and then you can cover analysis of feedback.
Sure. I think you see, we touched up upon planning, right, in one of the earlier questions. Excuse me. So the first step of planning is market research, right? Like, where do you start planning from? It starts with research. It starts with you understanding the domain, the industry, the segment, the sector you want to be in, understanding what is the current competitive landscape, understanding what are the current problems out there, understanding who are solving those problems, how are they solving it, can you do it better? If yes, how are you going to do it? What is going to be your edge? Is quality your differentiation? Is price your differentiation? Is placement your differentiation? Placement slash distribution your differentiation? There are multiple ways you can create your differentiation as well, right? So and the underlying layer to all of this is thorough market research. Without you understanding how your environment is, how will you even excel in that?
Yeah.
And the only way you can understand your market is through research, is through you putting in the hours and understanding what is happening out there, right? And market research, I think the most basic way to go about it is through primary and secondary sources. Primary sources will be anything that you do directly, right? Like it could be things like surveys, it could be things like events, it could be things like podcasts, it could be a bunch of things where you're directly involved and you're sort of collecting data or information firsthand. All of those become your primary sources. And your secondary sources could be things that you find online, things that you research on, things that people have published or written about, research papers and publications. It could be other people's learnings and so on and so forth, right? So those are the secondary sources. So I think a combined of primary and secondary sources together could form your initial market research activity or exercise. And once you start doing this enough number of times, you will probably get better at it, and you will evolve methodologies, or you will evolve things that people use out there to do, let's say, something like an advanced market research or a very, very specific targeted market research, right? There are literally firms out there which offer market research as a service, right? And the reason why they're able to do that is because they have gone through such a steep learning curve and have so much experience in doing that, that they know exactly where to go to find what kind of information, and at least if not know exactly where to go, how to get that information, right? So there's a methodology involved, there is targeting involved, there's a process to market research as well, right? So maybe what I would recommend listeners to do is start with the primary and secondary sources approach, understand what you can gather from that, process that information, see how you can implement that, or achieve your objectives through that. And once you do this enough number of times, go through a learning process or unlearning and relearning process where you can really see how others are going about their market research, and then you suddenly realize that, hey, I can probably borrow this best case practice from them and adapt that into my model, and I can probably take this from there and adapt that into my model, and suddenly your market research becomes so much more comprehensive, right? So that's how I would typically recommend users or listeners to go about it. And coming to the second aspect, which is more the feedback analysis, I think the most important thing when it comes to businesses or ventures is to make sure that your value chain is a closed loop and not an open loop. More often than not, people make the mistake of focusing on just one part or a few parts of the value chain, and they don't look at it holistically. Where if your value chain is not closed, you will often get lost in the process, and you will probably not get the desired results you want out of it, or you will not be able to achieve your targets, and probably not even be able to decipher why not. Right. So that is where having the closed loop is super important. And the final aspect, which actually closes the loop, is your feedback loop. Right. So having that feedback loop, which feeds right into either the first or one of the earlier nodes of your value chain, is super important, because always, be it life, be it business, be it studying, everything is an iterative process. Right. So it's not about like Simon Sinek says, like, how do you fall in love? You don't fall in love overnight. You fall in love with the small things that you do consistently over a period of time. Right. What's the point of brushing? you the reason why you brush is not because you see a drastic change 5 minutes after you finished brushing. It's because over a period of your lifetime you want to maintain good teeth, right? Like good dental health. That's why you brush. Why do you go to the gym? You don't get six packs in a day. You need to be consistent at it, and it's only in that process somewhere along the way that you become fit. Right. So everything in life is an iterative process, and feedback analysis is something that closes that loop, and it's something that sort of really puts meaning and perspective to everything that you're doing.
Yeah, brilliant. I think very nicely put as well. And I guess if I may ask, right, in the context of F&B over here, with what is sort of like a mechanism or like a rough way of thinking about how you handle with feedback? Because I think over here, especially when you're talking about a final product, in this case, not really a service, but more of appealing to someone's taste buds, right? The feedback is more dependent on obviously whether I liked it or not, and how much me personally I enjoyed it would not necessarily always mean that the product is bad, right? So how do you sort of make that differentiation where, I guess, essentially to sum up what I'm trying to ask, what is good feedback, and how do you assess good feedback in that sense?
I think good feedback is something which is basically genuine, where you feel like for example, I've learned this in the F&B, that the ratio of good feedback you give when you give a product for free is usually higher, right? So I never give free products when I want genuine feedback. So this is again something very, very trivial or basic, but that has really helped me, because when people pay for something, they are genuine about it, and if there's even a small aspect or 10% of dissatisfaction that they felt, they will express that. So you need to sort of create this space or create this environment where your consumers or your customers can be genuine with you. Right. So it could be in the F&B space, it could be through direct interactions with customers who walk up to your door, or in the case of technology or any other channels, it could be through understanding how much time they're spending on the platform, where the maximum drop-offs are happening, what's the bounce rate like, and so on and so forth, right? So how do you identify good feedback? I think it starts with understanding how genuine is the feedback. And secondly, it's also, I think, a lot about who the feedback is coming from, right? A lot of times you will get feedback from a lot of people, but how you filter feedback is through relevance. So if Pawan is a target customer of mine and I serve him my coffee and he tells me this coffee is great, I would actually appreciate that feedback, because I want to reach out to more Pawans out there, right? But then if tomorrow I'm reaching out to somebody else and they're not a part of my TG and they give me a feedback saying your coffee is great, I don't think I should be too happy about that. I mean, on the surface level, yes, that's a good compliment to have. But having said that, what you really need to see for what it is, right? That it's not something that is going to really contribute to your top line, because you're not targeting that audience, you're targeting this audience,
Yeah.
right? So for you to firstly create that environment where feedback can be genuine, that's super important. And once you have that, you need to have your filters in place based on relevance, based on TG, of which feedback you're going to accept, or which feedback you're going to act upon, and which feedbacks you're going to just sort of view on the surface level.
Brilliant, brilliant. I think that's a good way to think about it as well. Right. So next we'll sort of look at Kingsman's journey again, right? Which is to start off with an offline store that you once had where you were serving customers, to then throughout the life cycle moving to a more to a cloud kitchen sort of based model, right? But in all of these, there is still the aspect of an offline store, or some physical presence and some infrastructure that needs to be maintained, that is a part of it, right? So when it comes to managing this, what would you say are some must be's that you need to have? And this can be both in like an infrastructure like a cloud kitchen, or also multiple outlets that you had in like a QSR model, right? So
Sure.
what are some must be's in terms of like for an entrepreneur specifically that they need to like let's say for an owner to think about, and also what are some must not be's and things to avoid altogether in this space? And these can be broadly both in terms of, I guess, staff management of that, management of resources, and all sorts of resources. So yeah, anything can be covered. So yeah, must be's, must not be's.
I'll start off with the must be's. I think the first and the most important thing is for you to have clarity of thought for brand and product, right? F&B is one of such industries where you cannot create an entry barrier. Anybody can start at any time with any offering, right? Because at the end of the day, it's something so basic, right? If you go about Maslow's triangle, food is one of our basic needs, and it'll never go out of demand, right? So there'll always be demand for it, which means there'll always be supply for it, which means there'll always be new entrants into the market, which means that it's very, very hard for you to create an entry point barrier into the F&B, right? So, so then what do brands do? How do they withhold or hold back the market share that they have acquired, right? So how they do that is through their branding. So if I have to just sort of break this down very simply, the 0 to 1 journey in F&B is all about you finding the right product market fit, you understanding your right target audience, you understanding your pricing, you understanding your placement, so on and so forth. That's the 0 to 1 journey. If you excel that, you'll probably get to 1. The 1 to 10 journey in F&B is all about consistency, right? You must have come across this problem, which all of us at some point have cribbed about our favorite brands, or some brand out there saying, "Hey, that brand used to be so good, and now it has gone down over the years," right? And that happens primarily because they scale. And at the end of the day, you're dealing with something which is as good as life, which is food, right? Like it's something very dear and near to people, right? So as you scale, it's very important for you to be consistent, because that is where majority of the food brands which are able to crack the initial bit but are not able to really take off fail, right? So the 1 to 10 journey is all about consistency, and the 10 to 100 journey is all about branding, right? Like why do you go to Starbucks? You don't go to Starbucks because they serve the best coffee. You go to Starbucks because of the experience, because of the brand value, because of the fact that you could go and sit in an AC room and have a meeting or catch up with a friend or whatever it is, right? So in the long run, the only sort of entry point barrier you can probably create in the F&B is your brand, right? So must be first point, have clarity on your brand and product, what you're trying to do, how you're trying to do it, where you're going to place it, who are you targeting, how you're going to acquire them, how you're going to retain them, right? So that's the first thing. Second thing, for you to achieve that clarity, you need thorough research and planning. Again, something that we have stressed upon in our previous questions, right? You need to do intensive market research to your identify or understand your environment to the best possible way, so that you can excel in that and create your space in that. So research and planning is paramount. After that, I would say placement. and branding itself, right? Like how do you identify where should I place myself and how should I place myself? How can I be more appealing to my target audience and how can I be more accessible to my target audience?
Yeah.
And lastly, I would say always keep an eye out for monetization or your financial aspects. Like know what your burn rate is, know what your capex requirement is, know what your break-even points are, know what your gross margins and net margins are. Understand how you can control cost. Understand how you can optimize for top line. Always try to have multiple revenue streams so that even if a blue swan event like a pandemic or something happens, you still have some options to sort of pick from when it comes to diversifying your revenue or top line. So yeah, just keeping an eye out on the financial aspect of the whole venture. So I think these are some of the must be's, and moving on to some of the must not be's. I think the first thing that I would highly recommend for people is to stop getting into the food industry with the mindset or because of the reason that food is my passion, right? Like the number of people who enter this industry because they think food is their passion, which might be true, not at all discounting that, but there's a difference between being passionate about something and being a professional at something, right? And if you're just passionate, you're going to fail. So you need to understand that and you need to make that transition. It's great if you have passion for food. Now try to work towards becoming a professional at food. Try to upskill yourself. Try to do your certifications. Try to do your courses. Try to probably, if not anything else, just go and watch YouTube videos. Right? That's probably where you start. Right? Go Google recipes and try them out in your home kitchen. Uh, do whatever it takes for that upskilling so that you are transitioning into what you're signing up for, right? And I'm saying this because food industry is one of the most brutal industries out there. The attrition rate is so high. Imagine 100 brands were onboarded today or enter the F&B industry today. How many make it past the 6 month mark? Just guess. Give me a wild number.
In terms of percentages,
Yeah.
I would say like 10, 15.
Yeah. The answer is about 20.
Oh,
Right? So 80% of them fail within the first 6 months.
wow.
Why is that the case? Right? Like I've literally grown up in the city and I've been passing around some streets for years together now. And every year, the same store has a new brand with a new offering
Yeah.
trying to do the same thing. And 6 to 12 months later, they fail, they go away, and
Yeah.
somebody else comes in and does the same thing. And
Yeah.
that cycle repeats, right? So, so it's very important for you to sort of understand, why the attrition rate is so high and how can you avoid the attrition problem in the F&B. And one of the ways you can avoid that is by you transitioning from somebody who's just passionate about it or wants to do it as a secondary income or as somebody who's just diversifying their investment to somebody who's working full time into that, right? So that's the first and the most biggest must not be according to me. um, Secondly, I would say focus on quality because in the current day and age we live in, consumers are getting more and more aware and educated with every passing day, right? So they know what they are buying, they know what they are paying for. So you serving substandard quality products or basically setting the wrong expectations and delivering something else is only going to lead to more attrition and bad experience for the brand as well as the consumer, right? So always keep an eye out for quality and know what you signed up for or what you started off or intended to do versus what you're actually doing. Um, and again, this difference in substandard quality could come in because of various factors, right? Like it could come in right from because of staff, because of lack of training, because of lack of SOPs and systems in place. It could come because of irregular sourcing or supply chains. There are multiple factors which lead up to this. So it's always important for you to keep a pulse on all of these things and understand if something is going off the radar, how do you fix that? Right? And always gauge it from that quality lens for you to retain your customers. Apart from that, must not be must also be the same, the financial aspect what I mentioned, right? Like always keep an eye out on your financial aspect. Even VCs and investors in today's day and age are evolving from gone are the 2015 investment days where people were willing to give you money to burn to acquire users.
Yeah.
Now everyone's talking about profitability. Now everyone's looking at cash flow positive. Now everyone's looking at your EBITDA. They want to know when will you turn positive, when will you make money, and when will you give them the return that they are anticipating. Right? It's no longer just passing the parcel to somebody else and just getting acquired or having a loss-making company in the name of market share.
Yeah.
So one of the must not be's must be you coming with the mindset that I just want to acquire users or market share and I don't mind doing it at a loss. So that's something that I think you should definitely avoid.
Yeah, very interesting. I think the good advice, I think, for startups in general across all
sectors. Not just F&B.
Yeah, especially with the way the trend is going. Yeah, that's just very insightful. Okay, we'll come back to your journey, and in your journey, of course, you've built companies and you've also taken exit from them when the time comes, especially with Beer Tech, and both with Beer Tech and with Buffbaer as well, right? So for first-time entrepreneurs who are sort of thinking about it and going through ideas, and they're not very clear on what is the end point, right? And what does that state sort of look like? So we'll paint a picture for them to understand that better. So in a startup journey, what would you recommend first? And we look at two things. One is, of course, making an exit from a particular venture and moving to other things, but also defining success, right, as an end state. So how do you sort of go about that? And with this, setting small goals for yourself, or I guess knowing when to step out as well, these kind of aspects. So we'll talk about like defining success and goals in this thing, and we'll talk about making an exit and moving on to something else as part of the second one.
Sure. I mean, talking about the goal setting, right? Like, again, I would like to quote Vishen Lakiani here, who has this very famous concept of means goal and end goals, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's very important for you to understand what is an end goal and what is a means goal, right? Like, when you say success, it's very subjective.
Yeah.
Success could be as simple as me serving a cup of coffee to a customer, which puts a smile on his or her face, or success could be me making $1 million from my business, right? So it's very subjective. So what's important for us is to sort of identify what your goals are, making sure your goals are smart, um, and making sure you differentiate between what is a means goal and what is an end goal, right? So, and furthermore, if I had to break down this process of goal setting, I think for an entrepreneur or somebody who's starting out, uh, the simple process that they can sort of inculcate is first and foremost problem identification. Identify what problem you're trying to solve. Does the problem even exist in the first place, or is it something that is just in your head? If it does exist, how big is it? And where all does it exist? So on and so forth. Like try to know the problem in the best way possible. Only then you will be able to solve it. Otherwise, there are plenty of people who must have stumbled upon the same problem. Right. So the first step is identifying your problem. Once you have done that, maybe the next step is identifying the solution. Right. Now, what are the potential ways in which you can solve for that problem? Right. And you understanding if those solutions are realistic, are they feasible, are they something which fall under your scope of execution? Do you have all the resources financially and non-financially for you to go through the execution of that, so on and so forth, right? And then third step would be what is the best problem solution fit, right? So there could be multiple solutions to the same problem, and one single solution could potentially cater to more than one problem, right? So for you to find that right marriage between the problem and solution is super important if you want to build a scalable business. So that becomes the third step. Once you have that problem solution fit ready, then you talk about opportunity or market, right? So then you go see out there in terms of, okay, I think I've stumbled upon a problem and I think I have a fair solution to it. I've done my research. I've understood the depth and scale of the problem. I've understood what are the existing solutions in the market. I've understood how people are going about solving it. I've identified some uniqueness about how I want to solve it. It could be through placement, price, product, all of that we have already spoken about. So having this knowledge, right, like of market. And once you do your research and once you acquire this knowledge, the next thing is about having the product market fit. First is the product solution fit, problem solution fit. Then comes from the solution comes your offering or product or service, and then comes market research, and then your product or service and market fit. Right? They're like, is there a consumer base out there which is willing to buy what you're selling, and how big is that, and how much are they willing to pay to get the solution or the service you're offering? Right? So all of these aspects come into your product market fit, and then comes the next step of actually jumping into the execution of this and gaining that initial traction. And once you gain that initial traction, it's about the feedback loop. So how do you fit that, whatever learnings, whatever experience you have had through your traction, back into your either the problem solution fit or the product market fit? Right? And then go through this iterative process repeatedly until you sort of evolve to a stage where you know that you are ready for your growth phase or the second stage of the product life cycle.
Got it.
Right. So I think that's a framework that has worked for us in terms of defining our goals and going about goal setting and executing those. And also covering the second aspect of your question, which is more of making an exit. I think the first and the most important thing is to be not scared of you accepting your reality for what it is. Right? A lot of times I have seen entrepreneurs in particular and people in general in life being a little delusional about their reality, where they are not very open by choice or by ignorance, where they are very deluded about the sort of reality they are in. So it's very important for you to keep that pulse on reality and understand where you are at, and sort of not be scared of letting go, or for that matter investing further into something that you are interested in. Right? So I don't think you should really always look out for that exit. um, I mean, don't get me wrong here. It's very important for you to have an exit strategy when you're starting something, right? Not just entrepreneurship, even when you're getting into a job, even when you're taking up a project or an assignment, it's very important for you to have that exit strategy, or at least a vague idea of how you want to get out of it. But having said that, it's again more like a vision or a path guider. It's not really something that you actively pursue as a goal. Right? So it's something that happens along the way based on how situations and opportunities evolve. Right? So again, exiting for me was more driven by the situations and the environment we were in and what made sense at that point. Right? So many a times things might not pan out based on your plans always. Right? You might still do everything that's in your control, and that might not be good enough for you to cut it. Or luck might come in as a factor, and it might play against your favor, right? And then, despite you doing everything, you might not make it, because let me give you a practical example, right? Today, let's say Pawan starts with I don't know, a podcast where he's reaching out to the youth of the country, trying to educate them or provide value to them in return for their time, in return for their engagement. Now I realize that okay, Pawan is gaining a fair share of success doing this, and I want to be in the same space. So I come in and I put like bigger bucks on the table, and then I acquire all your users, and then I give the same product or the same content.
Yeah.
I probably go interview the same people you get on your podcast,
Yeah.
right? And then suddenly I've sort of bypassed you or undercut you, right? And you might feel very helpless or frustrated in your place that something like this happened. But it's a shrewd business world that we live in, and this happens to everyone and has been happening for time immemorial, right? Like it's something that has happened in the past. It's something that will happen in the future. So what's important for you is to understand when to let go and when to hold on, and how long to invest in what, and how to make the best out of the situation you are in.
Yeah.
Right? So there is no one right answer to what is the best exit possible. It's very subjective, it's very individualistic, and I think what you just need to keep an eye out for is your learning throughout the process, right? Like, like as there's the famous quote which says, "You only win or you learn, you never fail." Right?
Yeah.
So don't look at failures as failures. You look at it as learning, and then you sort of move past that and adapt those learnings into either the same thing that you're doing, which you're continuing to invest in, or something else that you do after that.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that's more the approach you should have.
Yeah, I think very interesting. I think to sort of have such a logical, it's very important to be so logical about the whole process, right? Like, yes, of course, it's very emotionally driven. You're putting so much of your time and your energy and
Of
effort into
course.
it. But at the same time, you have to understand the kind of ecosystem that's out there, or you have to accept reality for what it is. So it's very important to be
Exactly.
logical at every step, also to recognize what is going on and keep like have that grasp of reality, I guess, in a way. So yeah, that's
Exactly.
an interesting point that, yeah. Okay, we'll move to the work they did with Beer Tech, and a lot of it
Sure.
around consulting clients and providing data-driven decisions for them to make, right? And a lot of people, obviously, the consulting around data is something that's really in demand right now, because
Sure.
we're seeing how powerful data is becoming, right? And how much insights you can get out of it for brands to make better decisions constantly.
Sure.
So a lot of people want to be involved in the space and want to understand that as well, right? So when it comes to this, when it comes to providing a service such as this, a lot of it becomes around sales, around defining the project work, defining the boundaries of the work, how much is in the scope, how much is not. So all of these aspects sort of, all of these aspects sort of come into the picture, right? So what insights or what would you like to share around a couple of these things that we'll explore? One is getting your first client, because I think that's a big challenge, right? When you don't have a demonstrated track record to sort of show that, okay, you've been doing this, getting that first client is like a very crucial thing. So insights
Sure.
on that. And second thing is, in general, for that, both the first project and for all projects after that, how do you set expectations clearly? And what is a good process that you need to use to make sure that you're delivering the right service and you're delivering no more than the right service also at times, right? So yeah,
Sure.
we'll cover both these aspects.
Sure. I think if it talking about gaining the first client or the initial few customers, right? Like I think the most important thing there is you understanding what your network can give you for starters, because that's the first place you can rely on when it comes to creating those entry points, right?
Mm,
Like something that we briefly touched upon in one of our earlier questions was the fact that there is no entry point barrier in the F&D,
mm,
right? Parallelly, in a sales cycle or a sales process, the most important step or the first step is entry point creation, right? Like you identifying who your target customer or client is and who the decision maker there is, and how can you, for starters, get into a meeting with them, right? And who's going to get you that meeting? Of course, there is your traditional cold outreach and cold calls and cold emails and all of that on one end. There are your warm referrals and warm leads or inbound on the other. And network plays a huge aspect of all of this, right? So I think it's very important for you to utilize your network if you have one, and if not, start building one.
mm,
Right. I think first clients come from networks for people, right? So that's the most important aspect. Secondly, I think it's also about clarity in terms of thought and communication, right? When you talk to somebody, when you're selling a service or a product to somebody, um, it's in our human innate nature to not be sold to,
mm.
right? Nobody wants to be sold to. Everybody wants to be selling,
Yeah.
right? And for you, the art of sales is in you making the client or potential client derive the value that you are trying to deliver,
Mm,
right? So your sales process should not be, hi, I'm ABC, this is my product and these are the value props and this is the price and you should buy this. I think an ideal sales process is, hi, I'm so and so. I love your brand. I love the work you've been doing. I would like to talk to you more about the challenges you're facing. How have you tried to overcome those challenges? What are the previous solutions you have implemented? Why did they fail? Is there a better way you can do this? And then sort of, have these conversations to make the client sort of in the first place acknowledge that the problem exists.
mm.
And secondly, see the need for a solution.
Yeah.
And then you sort of plug in your product or your service,
Mm,
right? And that is where you get your conversions. That is where you see your success in terms of acquiring the first client or whatever it is. So always focus on clear communication of value prop, and as much as possible, try to derive that from the client than you giving it to them,
mm.
right? So that's another aspect. Again, as I mentioned, inbound has a lower sales cycle and better effectiveness than outbound. So even if initially you have to do outbound, nobody can escape that.
Yeah.
Do outbound, but then always have this approach of a long-term focusing on a solid sales funnel,
Mm.
which is more of system, not really cold calls and cold emails, but more of a system or a process where you have your lead generation mechanisms, you have your SQL, you have your sales cycle well defined. You know how many interactions you need. You know when you want to talk about what, when to introduce pricing, how much time between each follow ups, all of these things, right? Like thoroughly study this process and sort of try to excel in that process. And once you create that sales funnel, that's the only way you can sort of grow or excel in the long run.
Mm.
Right. So don't be short sighted in terms of how to acquire first customers. You
Mm.
can do it in multiple ways. You can do it through your network. You can do it through referrals. You can do it through cold calls, cold emails. You can do it through events. You can do it through networking forums. There are plenty of ways you can go about it, but always have this long term approach of creating a sales funnel.
Mm. Brilliant. Yeah. Yeah. And if you look at the other aspect, which is setting expectations with clients when it comes to like service-based businesses.
I think the one simple motto here is to under promise and over deliver,
Mm.
because it's as simple as that, right? Like never overcommit, because that is where your expectation setting goes wrong.
Yeah.
Even if you are capable of something, understand what the client needs and understand what is in your realm of execution or capabilities, and based on that, make sure you have the right sort of promise. Um, Again, funny story at Biotech, right? So I was the business guy and I had a co-founder who was a technical co-founder.
Mm.
So he would focus more on the product and the development, and I would focus more on the business. And being a sales guy, I would go please clients and talk to clients and agree for whatever the clients would sort of, ask us as a requirement. And
Mm.
then I would come back and we would have these 3 hour long meetings where, my co-founder or CTO would say, how could you promise this to the client? And
Yeah.
I would say, let's build it because we already have this, right? So it's always a constant tug of war between business and tech. Business people are going to push for more. They are going to push for utility and use case, whereas tech is going to push for development and, what's realistic,
Mm.
right? So this constant tug of war is going to happen. But having said that, when it's external, when it's outside the organization, one simple thing that has worked for us is under promise and over deliver, right?
Mm.
Always promise only what the client is looking for or seeking. And of course, once you manage to onboard them and sign them on, you can always find ways to deliver more value, right? A simple birthday email, or a simple uh, freebie, or a simple new feature on
Yeah.
free trial. All of these are ways in which you can give value, right? So, and these things, if you commit to it and don't deliver, is a very bad experience to the client. But if
Yeah.
you don't commit and deliver, the client is going to be extremely happy with you.
Yeah.
So always have the approach and intent to deliver these things, but promise only what the client is seeking for.
Yeah, yeah, brilliant. Yeah, I think that's a great insight. We'll move now to your consulting career that you've taken up, especially within F&B as well, right? And one of the things that's very interesting or we want to talk about over here is how much of the entrepreneurial journey and all the things that you've learned from it sort of helped you in consulting right now, right? Because I think this will also, it's very important we talk about this because one of the great benefits of having an entrepreneurial career and having multiple ventures and having worked on multiple things is the experience that you get, right? Which you can then share on to other people. And the learnings that you get in such a small amount of time, which you won't really get anywhere. So we're really curious as to what these learnings have been for you. And again, as usual, look at it two different aspects. One is uh, how has your entrepreneurial network and the sort of relationships that you've built sort of helped you later on in your consulting career, and how much of a relation there has been with that? And the second thing is, how do you package the experiences that you've had and all the things that you've learned into education, right? Which is into telling your customers or telling people about your learnings and sort of packaging all your learnings in one way. So how do you sort of go about that? Um, Sorry. So we'll cover both these things. One is network, other one is experience to education, sort of.
Sure. I mean, I've stressed enough on this. Your network is everything, right? Like when you're starting out as an entrepreneur, or for that matter, when you're just starting out in your career, your network plays a very key role in terms of the rooms that you have access to, and in terms of the people that you manage to interact with, right? So it's very, very, very important to build a network. So I would highly, highly recommend people to keep an eye out for improving your network. Attend regular gatherings, meetups, networking forums. Just generally be accessible to conversations. Have an open mindset. Try to not have any preconceived notions or judgments about any individual or anything or any subject. Um, and at the same time be very clear about who you are or what your vision is and what your capabilities are, because a huge aspect of networking is about exchange of value, right? So if somebody is trying to be a part of your network or choosing to be a part of your network, sooner than later they would expect some sort of a value, right? And you can also expect the same in return. So more often than not, especially in a professional environment, it's about value exchange, right? So be very, very clear about what your vision and what your capabilities are, so that that value exchange can be facilitated more easily, and sort of build on that network. Because at least for me individually, the whole consulting transition started because of my entrepreneurial network, where because of my track record, because of my experience, people right from my friends to in my immediate network to my professional network, people started reaching out to me for various requirements, right? Very early on, people used to reach out to me for, hey, dude, I need help making this website. And I know you have your own company, so you made a website, so I need help with this, right? And this is mind you back in like 2012, 2014 days, right? So it could be as trivial as that to something like, a fellow entrepreneur who's going through funding for the first time coming and talking to you about how to decipher a term sheet. Just because you've gone through the process yourself, you'll understand what are the key things to look out for, what clauses are usually the negotiation points, where to go hard, where to be soft, where to negotiate, where not to negotiate, uh, how to read between the lines, what is the fine print, right? All of these aspects. So there are multiple ways in which your network can come in handy for you across stages of your life. So and for me, all of my current clients did in some way or another come or emerge from my network itself, right? So it's very important for you to build on that network and sort of, always keep improving on that and build meaningful relationships through that.
Yeah.
So that's that. And the second aspect of yours was of the question was more in terms of translating your experience into education, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, something that I would highly, highly recommend people to do is document everything that they do, right? So, personally, I'm a documentation freak. If I open my Confluence or my Google Drive, you will see my past 6 years or 7 years since I've been working or going through entrepreneurship, right? So I see more often than not people missing out on this aspect of it because it's boring, it's time consuming, it's dull. But trust me, in the long run, this is what adds value. And when I have transitioned into this consulting career, one of the places where I'm able to derive value from are my legacy systems and processes, which I worked on throughout the course of my entrepreneurial experience. And those come in from the documentation, come in from the processes or systems that you have put in place, right? And now you're suddenly realizing, okay, so for the scale I was working at, these are the problems I faced, and this is how we could potentially go about solving it, and these are the sort of challenges we faced in doing so. Now you take all of this knowledge, which is rich experience and knowledge, and apply it in another environment with a different scale and different parameters, but pretty much the same problems or similar problems, right? And then suddenly you'll realize that, hey, I'm not new to this. This is not the first time I'm doing this. I already have a framework to go about it, right? I already have a thought process to go about this. So with a little bit of adaptation and localization of what you already did or have, you can now tackle the problem at a much larger scale, deriving multifold value. Because if the problem was X and your value was Y, now the problem is 5X and probably your value is 10Y,
Yeah.
right? So you need to always keep that eye out for how can you sort of work not just in the moment, but for life, right? Like any single time, like I can dial back and tell you sort of, what were the highlights of, let's say, 2018 August to me, because I just need to refer to one document and I know what my learnings, what my failures or, gaps were, and what were the key highlights, and so on and so forth, right? So what's very important is for you to document everything and sort of from time to time introspect, understand, what's going on, take a pause, see your reality, see what's going on, what's working for you, what's not working for you, and then sort of do more of what's working. Right. So go through this process from time to time so that you can do course correction if required, and if not, continue doing more of what's working for you.
Brilliant, brilliant. I think that's great. Okay, I think in terms of like your entrepreneurial journey and your professional experience, we've covered a lot of things and some great insights out of it. So for like the last, like, and the final few questions, we'll look at different aspects, the like from your career, from your life itself, which for people who are in like a similar place right now, right? And one of them is college. Another one is we'll talk about ISEC also briefly, and then we'll conclude on a couple of like lighter questions. So the first thing with college is if you had to give 2 or 3 tips, right? And we'll look at the kind of learnings that a college person can go through and which they can do to sort of become job ready and to have like a very good career, right? Which is on the theoretical side, courses, certifications, and this is broadly across industry, across whatever they're trying to get into, courses, certification. And then on the other hand, there's case studies, projects, internships, more of like the practical side of things, practical application of knowledge, right? So you have to, in general, talk about 2 or 3 tips for each of these that people need to follow. What would that be?
I think for starters, talking about certifications or courses, right? Like it's very important for you to have a clear objective of why you're doing what you're doing, right? And I think I can broadly classify the objectives into 2 types. The first, when you're exploratory in nature, when you're trying to dip your hands into multiple things and understand what you like, what you don't like, what you enjoy doing, what you enjoy but don't want to be doing as a career or on a day-to-day basis, so on and so forth, right? Like, so if you're in your exploratory phases, I would highly recommend trying out multiple things. You can join organizations like ISEC, you can be a part of your college MUNs, you can be a part of your college student clubs and entrepreneurial cells or entrepreneurial clubs. You can get on the organizing committee of your college fests. All of these are ways in which you can gain different experiences and be explorative in nature to not just sort of engage or explore opportunities which are external, but also for you to, on a very intrinsic level, understand yourself in terms of what your strengths are, what your likes are, what your dislikes are, so on and so forth, right? So if you're having this objective, I would highly recommend, experimenting. And the second broad category of objectives that I can think of is when you're consolidating, right? So this is the phase when you already know what you like, or know what you want to pursue, or know what you want to sort of excel in which case also, courses or certifications will add value or help. But in this case, it needs to be very research driven, and it needs to be backed by some amount of thought and clarity in terms of why you're doing a particular certificate, or why are you doing it from a particular institute, or how this is going to add long-term value in terms of where you want to get with respect to your career, right? So this is the type of objectives where I would not recommend being exploratory in nature, or just sort of trying out multiple things, right? Like you, you need to be very specific if you consider yourself to be somebody who's in the consolidating phase. So those are the 2 ways I would recommend you can go about your certifications or courses, based on how you would classify your objective to be. And secondly, with respect to your case studies, projects, and internships, I I for one would highly recommend doing all of it or some of it in some form or another, because personally I've never been a huge fan of just formal academics or education. A lot of my learnings in my life have come through practical experiences and application of doing things, and you get the opportunity to do it through case studies, through projects, through internships, right? So always keep an eye out for doing something more than just your formal academics, right? So of course, academics are important, and you need to sort of, do well in that for you to have that base benchmark for you to even enter the room. But once you enter the room, what's going to get you to the table and beyond is not your formal education.
Yeah.
It's your abilities and skill sets and the experience and track record that you have gained over the years. So that is where your internships, your case studies, your research papers, all of these things come into place, right? So again, that is something that I would highly, highly recommend for all the youngsters out there to not be very unidimensional in their college years or growing up years, where it's not just about getting the marks or achieving a certain graduation or degree. It's more than that. It's about you experiencing life in all aspects of it, and at the same time sort of constantly growing and upskilling yourself through that, right, to whatever degrees you can possibly do it. So yeah, highly, highly recommend doing things apart from academics.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that's great advice. We look at ISEC now before we go into like the closing couple of questions. And a lot of our listeners are ISECers, and matter of fact, a lot of people we do podcasts with are also ISECers by courtesy of our own
Great.
networks and all of that, right? So this is one thing that we like asking to anyone who has had like a distinguished career in ISEC. So again, we look at broadly for ISECers, mainly this question is because a lot of it is internal that we're going to talk about. One is benefits, because I think that's one of the crucial things you think about in ISEC and what you're getting out of it. And again, we look at it in two ways, and what this was for you. One is in terms of the professional skills and like the understanding of business that you get very broadly at a very young age, right? So what are some benefits that you saw, and what would you recommend, like in this sense also in terms of maximizing your learnings? That's one thing on the professional side of things. And on the other, it's about growing within the organization, right? So what are things, or how do you need to sort of conduct yourself, and both as a member in the initial phases and also as a leader in the more advanced positions that you take later on? So what are the things that come into the play over there, and what do you sort of do to not just be the best version of yourself, but to give back to the organization, because that's what you're thinking about at that time also, right? So let's cover both of these. We'll start off with benefits and skills and business understanding, and then we'll talk about internally growing.
Sure. I think the first and the biggest advantage of ISEC is the access to network it gives, right? Like we've stressed enough about networking and having a network. And one of the biggest takebacks for me individually, and something that I've seen collectively across generations of ISECers, is the kind of network that they manage to build and get access to, right? And especially in your college years, that's golden. Right, because your peers are pretty much limited to their immediate environment, which is their universities or the few clubs or whatever that they're a part of, right? So network is one of the biggest takebacks from an organization like ISEC. Once that is done, I think the next biggest takeback for me has been, as you pointed out, right, understanding the business. So gaining that perspective of how the reality works, or how the world works, and how businesses work, and how you could potentially excel in that. At a very early age, when you're in a part of an environment or an organization like ISEC, you get the opportunity to be there, right? So as early as probably when I was 19, I had the opportunity to go and sit in front of a HR head of a company and try to sell to them about how they should go for international talent over local talent, because we will give them so many advantages, right? So that in itself was huge learning experience for us in terms of how to, for starters, how sales works. Secondly, when we are selling whatever value props that we are selling, like, are they actually even legit? Like, are we just saying it for the sake of achieving a sale, or are they actually legit? And once you see the track record of the organization, you'll realize that they actually provide value, right? And I've had the first-hand experiences of interacting with both EPs or interns who come down to India, and at the same time organizations, where we have had organizations come back to us and said this was great. It provided a lot of value to us just having an international in the room, right? And likewise for the other stakeholder as well. So you getting that understanding of business, you're getting that understanding of sales, you're getting that understanding very, very much on the soft skill aspects, right? how to communicate, interpersonal skills, how to sort of present yourself, how to be a public speaker, how to conduct yourself in a group discussion, or sort of a group forum, how to present your views. So many of these aspects are something that you gain by being in an organization or an environment like I said. So I think that's again one of the top take backs I've had from there. And yeah, lastly, I think it gives you a very holistic approach to life itself, right? You on one hand you tend to have good amount of fun, make good friends, have a good time, but at the same time you also build a professional network,
Yeah.
right? So all in all, I think these are the top take backs one can expect from an organization like ISEC. And if you have to talk a little bit more about your role in it, everyone starts out as a member, and when you are a member, especially when you step into a voluntary organization where you're expected to work, it's very important for you to be motivated. Otherwise, you're going to be left out, or for that matter, not see the bigger picture, right? So we used to do this cow sessions, and I'm sure they still happen, where we stress about clarity of why, right? Like we talk about why are you here, and what do you intend to do, right? So. I think it's as a member, the most important thing is for you to identify your place in the organization, of where do you fit in, or rather, in the first place, do you fit in?
Yeah.
Because if you don't waste your time here.
Yeah.
And if you do, where do you fit in? Right. So I think as a member, that's the most important thing. And once you figure that out, then it's more about linear growth. It's about how you can sort of grow up the hierarchy, take on more responsibilities, start managing people as early as 18, 19, 20, 21. You'll be given a team, and you'll have to motivate those team members to achieve a collective goal. How cool or awesome is that,
Yeah.
right? Like at such an early age. So I think that is again something that you will learn along the way. And while you make the transition, and if you do get to the leadership or the management role, then I think it's more about giving back to the organization. Because once you have identified your role in it, and once you have sort of grown through it, now you're finally at a stage where you're taking responsibility for it, right? So then you start viewing things very holistically, very top level, right? So you try to see, for example, it's no longer about your own experience, but now it's about your entire local committee or members' experiences, right? So you start focusing on things like that. You start focusing on things like, how can I deliver more value? How can I do small things differently so that I can get a better result? Or what can I learn from the previous years so that I don't commit the same mistakes now? Right? Or for that matter, what can I pass on from my year to the subsequent generations to come so that they can do better than what we did?
Yeah.
Right. So when it comes to transitioning into a leader into an organization like I said, it's more about, I think, giving back, or rather sort of understanding how you can grow it. And that process also gives you back more, right? Like for example, as a member, as I mentioned, I had the opportunity to go and talk to an HR head of a company and sell international talent to them. As the president of the entity, I had the opportunity to go have a board meeting with Mr. Buffbaer, who is the then CEO of Titan, right? So you see, it gives back in its own ways, of how you can sort of contribute to the organization and take back from it.
Yeah.
So yeah, all in all, I would highly, highly recommend something like ISEC, if not ISEC per se for everyone. But be clear about what your end goal is, and where you're headed in life, and how whatever that you're signing up for is going to lead you there or push you in that direction.
Yeah, yeah, brilliant. And it's such a throwback, and sort of just reliving my own experience, and sort of relating the insights as well throughout that answer. Like that was like a personal uh, moment for me in the podcast as well, to sort of listen to
Great,
that relate to it.
great.
So that was amazing. Okay, we'll do a final couple of questions, and the first one is something that we like asking everyone who comes on a podcast with us, Raj, which is, what has been the role of dialogue and experience-based education in your life? Probably perspectives that you received, conversations that you've had with mentors, peers, teachers, anyone it can be, that really sort of shaped the way you think about reality, right? And again, we'll address it two fronts. One is, how did it help you form a better inspiration for yourself, and by looking at
Sure.
all these people and the conversations that you had? And on the other hand, how did it help you form better mental models and structure your thoughts better, create better thinking frameworks for you going forward? So both of these aspects from like the dialogues that you had.
Sure. So, you see, everyone seeks motivation or inspiration, right? But there are again two kinds of people: people who look for it in external sources and people who look for it intrinsic. I'm more of the latter, right? So for me, motivation doesn't come from external sources. I don't get inspired by, just people talking or outside. I get more inspired by the kind of thoughts and the thought process that I go through on a very intrinsic level. Now, what is that thought process derived from or influenced by? It's the conversations you have with the relevant folks, right? It's the kind of upskilling or learning that you do from the relevant channels or sources. So dialogue or interactions or experience based learning is everything according to me, right? Because as I mentioned earlier, the formal education or academics is just preparing you for the start line of the race, not the finish line. And what is going to define where you finish and how you finish and if you finish is going to be your realistic learning from life experiences and dialogues, and how quickly you can adapt that to your lifestyle and everything that you do, right? So I think it's very, very, very important for you to have that open mindset. um, we often hear people say don't be judgmental, but I think it's in our innate human nature to be judgmental, right? Like the fact that I'm having this cup of coffee and I say this coffee is great is a judgment in itself, right? Like Bangalore's gotten so hot this summer, that in itself is a judgment in itself. So everything that we do is a form of a judgment or not. So instead of just trying to be non-judgmental on the face value of it, what I would highly recommend is that it's okay to make judgments, but never be married to them. Always be open to change and always approach any life situation or dialogue for that matter with an open mindset, and try to see the positives out of it and see if there is something of value for you to learn or adapt from that, right? So it's very important for you to approach everything with a very open mindset and sort of uh, derive value from it, right? And dialogues or conversations or experiences is one of the most common ways how people learn, how people sort of experience things that they've never experienced before, right? So it's very important for you to stay open to that. So that's that. And with respect to your mental models, right? Like it's a very funny question, or rather it puts a smile on my face, because I often I use this term with my friends. We call it mental munchies, right? So we just tend to have these deep conversations about the most random things in world, and sort of derive value from it, right? Like for example, there's a friend of mine with whom we were the other day just chilling and planning to get some food, and we opened up Swiggy and we were about to place an order, but within 15 minutes we ended up having a conversation where, forget placing the order, we start talking about one small UI change Swiggy had made on that particular release, right? And that conversation went on for 15-20 minutes. And he's actually a PM at another organization, so he comes from a very good understanding of product. I come from a very good understanding of business, and we were both exchanging perspectives. And 15-20 minutes into the conversation, we realized we came here to order food, and that hasn't been done yet. But again, that conversation had so much value where I could take back something from it, and so did he. Right? So it's very important for you to have these conversations, or have these sort of interactions with people who are like-minded, right? Surround yourself with like-minded people, and surround yourself with people who match your wavelengths, your interests, your passions, and then you'll suddenly realize that all of these happen. You don't have to put in effort, right? They come natural to you if you're in the right environment with the right people. Otherwise, even if you put in effort, you'll not get these things, right? So I think it's all about, as I mentioned, being open to all perspectives, being as open as possible, being sharp about what you can learn and adapt, and at the same time, being open to various things that life can throw at you, either in the form of conversations or in the form of experiences, right? And just discover maybe friendships, maybe relationships, maybe everything that can come out.
Yeah, brilliant. I think that's very nice. So that's a very nice anecdote as well. I think I'm very
Yeah.
fascinated by that. So I'm glad that you shared that. Okay, awesome. I think final question is that we've taken, we've gone well beyond time as well, finally.
Yes.
So we'll do a final question, and this one is just for fun, just hypothetical, right? Which is, if you had to go back to college and change
Okay.
something, do something differently, what would that be? And again, two context. One is if you could go back to your first year of college, and in another context, you could go back to your final year of college. What would you change? What would you do differently?
Well, if it was my first year of college, I would never join the college I did.
Okay.
Because I anyway eventually ended up changing my colleges. So ended up changing my college rather. So I think that's the one thing that I would change. But jokes apart, not much actually, to be very honest. Because as I mentioned from a very early on, I always had this eye out for doing something apart from academics.
Mm,
Um, like we spoke, there was M.A.D Machines that I was involved in. Before that, I was actually a part of an NGO, so I was
mm,
involved with that. And before that, I was actually working with the Bangalore Traffic Department on a few things. So that was again something that I was involved in. So I always had something going on the side apart from academics. So what I would highly recommend for people is again to not be unidimensional with whatever they are doing, right? Especially at such an early age, right? If you are in your first year of engineering, I mean, the world is your canvas and you're the painter, right? So make the best out of it. Like, even if you make a sucky painting, it's all right. You can just clear the canvas and start over again, right? So you have time at your advantage. So start early, fail fast, and grow, right? That's the most important thing. Um, I think that's the biggest thing that I would want to recommend to all listeners that they can do in their potential first year.
mm,
And with respect to their last years, or basically towards the end of their formal education, I think what's very important is to sort of have the right focus in terms of what you're transitioning into.
mm,
And if you don't, at least acknowledge that you don't and start working towards changing that,
mm,
right? It's all right because not everyone will always have clarity. It's all right to be a little clueless or be a little lost even after you graduate, let alone while graduating, right? So, but what's important is you not allowing that to be a state of mind.
mm,
You acknowledging that is the current state of mind, and how can you work towards bettering that,
mm,
right? So I think it's what's the most important aspect towards the end of your career, or something that again worked for me towards the end of my career, was I started Kingsman when I was in my third year of engineering. And
mm,
to be completely honest with you, I started with the simple objective that I have about 3 semesters to go before I graduate, and by the time I graduate, I need to build this to an extent where it can absorb me on a full-time capacity.
mm,
That is literally one of the personal goals,
mm,
right? So, and luckily I could achieve that. So for me, I had that sort of clarity, or that sort of a transition planned out for myself, where I said, okay, if this happens, then this is the path I want to take,
mm,
right? So I think that's very important, where you need to identify what your transition is or what your next step is. And this is applicable not just during the ending stages of your formal education, it's probably applicable across life, right? Once you move from one phase to another in life, I think it's very important for you to acknowledge that transition and sort of have have an idea about the vision or direction you're going into.
mm. Yeah, yeah, perfect. I think that's a great note to sort of conclude as well. So yeah, that brings us to the end of all of our questions. Rajat, thank you so much for doing this with us. So much, I think so much we explored both in terms of like your career and very specific insights from some of the learnings that you had and things that you've done.
Sure.
In general, talking about mental models in your journey, things that you've picked up and other roles that you've taken up. So I think all in all, we covered like a very extensive range of topics, and it was a great conversation as well. So yeah, thank you so much for doing this with us. I think it's a great chat and our listeners will enjoy it as well. So yeah.
Likewise, it was a pleasure to be here.
Yeah.